If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The Regent Star restaurant, located on Regent Street, was known as one of London's most sophisticated establishments. With its elegant interior, crystal chandeliers, and a clientele made up of high-ranking executives, the atmosphere exuded exclusivity. It was precisely there that Louisa, an 11-year-old girl with brown skin and curly hair tied in a simple ponytail, took a deep breath before stepping through the gleaming glass doors. Dressed in a school uniform, already worn from constant use, Louisa carried a small wooden box filled with artisanal candies that her mother, Mrs. Constance, had prepared the night before, despite a fever that hadn't subsided for days. The girl looked at the box and thought about the medicine she needed to buy. Her mother's chronic bronchitis treatment had changed, and the new medication was not available through the NHS. It cost almost a third of the salary Mrs. Constance received as a cleaner. "Just £200 more, Mum, and we can buy your medicine," she whispered to herself as she adjusted the box. Taking a deep breath, Louisa entered the restaurant with the caution of someone who knows they don't belong there. The maitre d', Mr. James, a middle-aged black man who had worked there for over 20 years, recognized her immediately. Unlike the other staff, he always allowed Louisa to enter to sell her candies. "Good afternoon, Mr. James," Louisa greeted with a shy smile. "Good afternoon, little one. How is your mother?" he asked, bending down to be at the girl's height. "She's still sick, but she'll get better when she gets the new medicine," she replied with the typical conviction of a child who refuses to lose hope. Mr. James gently stroked the girl's hair. "You can go in, but be discreet. The new manager isn't as understanding as the old one." Louisa nodded and began to circulate through the sophisticated environment. The restaurant was particularly busy that Thursday afternoon. Executives in impeccable suits discussed business, while savoring dishes prepared by the renowned chef. The girl approached the tables cautiously, offering her candies with a polite but restrained smile. Some people bought out of pity, others out of genuine sympathy, and many simply ignored her as if she were invisible. Louisa was already used to this. What she didn't expect was what would happen next. At one of the central tables was Roderick Alistair, a 43-year-old businessman, CEO of Alistair Tech, a technology company facing serious financial difficulties. Tall, with an athletic build and graying hair at his temples that gave him an air of experience, Roderick was known for his explosive temper and for treating subordinates with calculated coldness. That day his face showed more tension than usual. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing, and each call seemed to make him more nervous. When Louisa approached his table, he was in the middle of a heated conversation. "What do you mean Paul had an accident? The meeting is this afternoon. Do you have any idea what's at stake?" He slammed his fist on the table, making the cutlery clatter. Louisa hesitated for a moment, but she had already been noticed. Gathering her courage, she took a small step forward. "Would you like to buy a candy?" "They're £5 each," she said in an almost inaudible voice. Roderick looked up, irritated by the interruption. His gaze swept over Louisa's small, frail figure, lingering on her worn uniform and the simple wooden box. "What is a child doing here?" "This is a luxury restaurant, not a street market," he snapped, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Louisa's face flushed instantly. "I'm sorry, sir. It's just that my mother is sick and I need to help with her medicine." "And is that my problem?" Roderick interrupted, his face contorted in an expression of contempt. "Isn't it enough that I have to deal with a company crisis? Now I have to be bothered during my lunch. Where is the management of this place?" People at nearby tables watched the scene with discomfort. Some lowered their eyes to their plates, pretending not to notice what was happening. "Please, sir. They're very tasty. My mother made them with a lot of care," Louisa insisted, her voice choked. "Care doesn't pay my bills or solve my problems," Roderick replied disdainfully. "Go away, I don't want to buy anything. And I suggest you find a more appropriate place to sell your candies." Tears began to form in Louisa's eyes. She held the box tighter against her chest as if seeking protection. That's when a female voice from another table intervened. "I want 5 candies. 1 of each flavor if you have them." It was Camilla Rivers, a young lawyer having lunch alone. In her 30s, with shoulder-length hair and determined green eyes, She glared at Roderick with evident disapproval before smiling gently at Louisa. The girl approached Camilla's table, grateful for the gesture. As she selected the candies, silent tears streamed down her cheeks. "What's your mother's name?" Camilla asked, trying to distract the girl from the humiliation she had suffered. "Constance, Mrs. Constance de Silva," Louisa replied, trying to hold back her tears. "She used to be a bilingual secretary, but now she works cleaning houses." Camilla raised her eyebrows, interested. "Bilingual? What language does she speak?" "Chinese. We lived in China for 3 years when I was little. My mother worked for a big company there, and I learned at school. We came back to the United Kingdom when the company closed its branch here." This information caught Roderick's attention, who could still hear the conversation. He feigned checking his phone but was clearly paying attention. "And you speak Chinese too?" Camilla asked, genuinely impressed. Louisa nodded, a little pride replacing the shame in her gaze. "I speak fluently. Actually, sometimes I help my mother translate things when she can't remember a word." At that moment, Roderick's phone rang again. He answered quickly, and his face paled upon hearing the news from the other end. Paul, his official translator, had been in a car accident on the way to the restaurant and was in the hospital. Nothing serious. But he wouldn't be able to attend the crucial meeting happening in less than an hour with an important Chinese investor. Roderick hung up the phone and ran his hands through his face, desperate. That meeting was his last hope to save the company from bankruptcy. An £80 million contract that could not only clear his debts but also finance the launch of the new software his team had developed over the past 2 years. Without a Chinese translator, everything would be lost. Louisa, still beside Camilla, watched the businessman out of the corner of her eye. Despite the humiliation she had suffered, something within her, that kindness her mother had always cultivated, prevented her from feeling anger or wishing harm upon that man. As she put away the money Camilla had given her, Louisa noticed the growing panic in Roderick's eyes. Something important was happening, something that involved the language she knew so well. After the humiliation she had suffered, Louisa took refuge in the ladies' room of the Regent Star restaurant. Sitting on the cold marble floor, she hugged the box of candies as tears streamed copiously down her face. The echo of her sobs reverberated in the empty room, amplifying the feeling of loneliness she felt. "I can't give up," she murmured to herself, wiping away tears with her uniform sleeve. "Mum needs that medicine." Meanwhile, in the main dining room, Roderick Alistair faced his own despair. With his cell phone pressed against his ear, he tried in vain to find a substitute for Paul, his official translator. "Don't you understand? The meeting is in 40 minutes. We need someone who speaks Mandarin fluently and understands technical technology terms." He ran his hand through his hair, disheveling the meticulously arranged morning hairstyle. "What do you mean no one is available? This is London, for God's sake. There must be someone." When he hung up, his expression was pure panic. His phone vibrated again, this time with a message from the restaurant manager. "Mr. Liang Wei has just arrived. He is at the bar waiting for you." "My God," Roderick murmured, looking around as if searching for an emergency exit. The Chinese investor had arrived early. There was no time to find another translator. Camilla Rivers, the lawyer who had bought candies from Louisa, observed the scene with curiosity. She approached Roderick's table with determined steps. "Problems with the meeting?" she asked without ceremony. Roderick looked at her with surprise. On any other day, he would have coldly dismissed the intrusion, but he was too desperate to maintain appearances. "My translator had an accident. I have a crucial meeting with a Chinese investor in a few minutes, and I don't speak a word of Mandarin." He let out a bitter laugh. £80 million going down the drain because I can't communicate." Camilla hesitated for a moment, remembering little Louisa and what she had said about speaking Chinese fluently. "That girl," she began. "What girl?" Roderick frowned, momentarily confused. "The candy girl. She said she lived in China for 3 years and speaks Mandarin fluently." The businessman let out an incredulous laugh. "Are you suggesting I use an 11-year-old child as a translator in a multi-million-pound negotiation? That's absurd. More absurd than losing £80 million. Camilla retorted, raising an eyebrow. Before they could continue their conversation, A middle-aged man wearing an elegant grey suit and carrying a leather briefcase approached the table. It was Liang Wei, the Chinese investor, who could change the fate of Alistair Tech. "Mr. Alistair," he asked in English with a strong accent. Roderick stood up immediately, extending his hand for a formal greeting. "Mr. Liang, what a pleasure to meet you in person. Please have a seat." Liang Wei settled in, looking around as if searching for someone. "Your translator?" he asked with evident difficulty. "Ah, yes, about that." Roderick cast a desperate glance at Camilla, who was still standing beside the table. There was a slight hitch. "He had a problem and won't be able to join us today." Liang Wei's face visibly hardened. In broken English, he expressed his frustration. "Very difficult for me. Not speak your language well. Technical terms impossible. Maybe better to postpone." "Postpone?" The panic in Roderick's voice was palpable. "No, please. I'm sure we can resolve this. I have a translation app on my phone that we can use." Liang Wei shook his head, clearly dissatisfied with the suggestion. "App not good for business. Many errors. I need to be sure I understand everything." It was at that moment that Louisa emerged from the restroom, her eyes still red from crying so much. She planned to leave the restaurant discreetly, but to do so she needed to pass by the table, where Roderick was now talking to the Chinese businessman. Hearing the words in Mandarin, she instinctively turned her head towards the conversation. Liang Wei noticed the girl's gaze and, surprisingly, smiled at her. Perhaps it was the familiarity of seeing a child amidst such a formal environment that made him relax momentarily. "Ni hao, Zhao Pengyu," he greeted in Mandarin. To Roderick's astonishment, Louisa responded promptly in the same language. "Ni hao Xiansheng, Hen Gaoxing Jian Dao Nin." Liang Wei's eyes widened in surprise and pleasure. "You speak Mandarin, and very well." Louisa smiled shyly, responding still in Mandarin. "I lived in Shanghai for 3 years when I was little. I studied at the international school there." Roderick watched the exchange with his mouth slightly open. Camilla gave him an "I told you so" look that made him swallow hard. Liang Wei turned to Roderick with renewed interest. "This young girl speaks Mandarin perfectly. Who is she?" Before Roderick could answer, Louisa spoke up in Portuguese. "I'm Louisa da Silva, sir. I was selling candies to help my mother buy medicine." She cast a quick glance at Roderick, remembering the humiliation she had suffered minutes earlier. The Chinese businessman frowned, confused by the situation. He looked at Roderick, then at Louisa, and then back at Roderick. "Mr. Liang," Roderick began with a forced smile, "it seems we've found a solution to our communication problem. Louisa could help us with the translation during our meeting." Turning to the girl, he continued in a tone that tried to mask his desperation. "You could help us, couldn't you, Louisa? You would be very well compensated for your time." Louisa hesitated. The memory of the humiliation was still fresh in her mind. She looked at the box of candies in her hands, thinking of her sick mother at home waiting for the medicine. She had every reason to refuse and let that arrogant man face the consequences of his behavior. However, something within her, that inherent kindness that not even the harshness of life had managed to tear away, prevented her from turning her back. "I can help," she finally replied, with surprising dignity for someone so young. "But I'm not doing it for you," she added, looking directly at Roderick. "I'm doing it because my mother always taught me to help those in need, even when that person doesn't deserve it." The verbal blow hit Roderick hard, making him flush with shame. Liang Wei, even without understanding Portuguese, perceived the tension between the two. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Louisa in Mandarin. The girl smiled politely and replied in the same language, "Nothing important, sir. I am available to help with the meeting." Roderick pulled up a chair for Louisa, now treating her with a respect that contrasted enormously with his previous attitude. "Please have a seat. I really appreciate your help." Camilla, satisfied with the turn of events, bid farewell with a discreet nod to Louisa and walked away. Before leaving the restaurant, she handed a business card to Mr. James, the maitre d', asking him to give it to the girl when the meeting ended. The waiter approached to take their orders. Roderick, trying to remedy his previous rudeness, turned to Louisa. "What would you like to eat?" "You don't need to worry about me," she replied, still maintaining her dignity. "I'm just here to translate." Liang Wei, however, insisted in Mandarin, A young translator needs to eat well to keep her mind sharp. Please order whatever you like. Embarrassed, Louisa only ordered an orange juice and a simple sandwich, choosing the cheapest items on the menu. Her modesty did not go unnoticed by Liang Wei, who watched everything attentively. While waiting for the orders, Roderick began to explain the meeting agenda to Louisa, hoping to prepare her for the technical terms that would arise. To his surprise, the girl absorbed the information with impressive ease. Our company has developed artificial intelligence software applied to industrial processes, he explained, still incredulous that he was explaining complex concepts to a child. Mr. Liang is interested in investing to bring this product to the Asian market. Louisa nodded, understanding perfectly. My mother worked as a bilingual secretary for a technology company, she explained. I grew up hearing about algorithms and artificial intelligence at dinner. The orders arrived, and with them the formal start of the meeting. Roderick opened his briefcase, taking out documents and a printed presentation. It was time to find out if that improbable partnership would work, or if his company was definitively doomed. The meeting began tensely. Roderick, still visibly nervous, spread documents across the table as he tried to organize his thoughts. Louisa remained seated between the two men, her legs dangling without reaching the floor, an image that contrasted drastically with the corporate environment of the Regent Star restaurant. Please, start by explaining the project's overview, Roderick instructed, addressing Louisa with an exaggerated formality that tried to mask his earlier embarrassment. The girl nodded and turned to Liang Wei, translating Roderick's words into impeccable Mandarin. The Chinese investor listened attentively, his impassive face gradually transforming into an expression of genuine interest as Louisa spoke. He says the company's vision is to revolutionize the British and international industrial sector, with artificial intelligence that optimizes processes and reduces waste. Louisa translated when Liang Wei responded. Roderick frowned, surprised not only by the fluency of the translation, but also by the eloquence with which the girl conveyed complex concepts. How do you know these words? He asked, unable to contain his curiosity. My mother worked with this, Louisa replied simply, as if it were obvious. She translated technical documents all the time. I helped her study. Liang Wei, noticing the side conversation, asked in Mandarin what they were discussing. Louisa quickly explained, and the Chinese businessman smiled, clearly impressed. He says he's surprised by my knowledge and that it shows children can absorb complex information when exposed to the right environment, Louisa translated for Roderick, a faint blush coloring her cheeks from the compliment. The meeting proceeded with Roderick presenting the technical details of the software. To his surprise, whenever he hesitated in explaining a more complex concept, Louisa not only translated correctly, but occasionally added context that made the idea clearer for Liang Wei. Are you adding things to what I'm saying? Roderick questioned at one point, with a mixture of admiration and distrust. I'm just providing cultural context for the Chinese, Louisa explained, unfazed. Some things don't make sense when translated literally. My mother always said that a good translator is a bridge between cultures, not just between words. Roderick nodded, unable to argue against that unexpected wisdom. For the first time, he looked at Louisa not as a poor girl selling candies, but as someone with extraordinary talent and intelligence. Her growing discomfort settled in his chest as he remembered how he had treated her hours earlier. As the presentation progressed, the dynamic between the three transformed. Liang Wei, initially skeptical about the girl's ability, now directed questions directly to her, trusting her interpretation. Roderick, in turn, began to rely more and more on Louisa to decipher the nuances in the Chinese investor's responses. He asks about the system's scalability in factories of different sizes, Louisa translated. He wants to know if it would work in a small family manufacturing plant as well as in a large automotive industry. Roderick explained the software's adaptable features, detailing how the system could be customized for different needs. As he spoke, he noticed that Liang Wei was attentively observing the golden locket Louisa discreetly wore around her neck, partially hidden by her school uniform collar. When he finished his explanation, Liang Wei pointed to the locket and asked something in Mandarin with evident curiosity. Louisa looked down, touching the object. He asked about my locket, she explained to Roderick, before responding to the investor in Mandarin. The conversation between the two stretched on for a few minutes, with expressions of surprise and recognition passing across Liang Wei's face. Roderick watched, increasingly confused and slightly irritated at being left out. "What's going on?" he finally interrupted. Louisa turned to him, her eyes shining differently. "My locket has the symbol of the company where my mother worked in China. It was a gift for completing her first year there. Mr. Liang recognized the symbol because he was one of the directors of the business group that controlled the company." Roderick blinked, trying to process that extraordinary coincidence. "Are you telling me your mother worked for Mr. Liang?" "Not directly for him," Louisa explained, "but for one of his group's companies. She was a bilingual executive secretary at the Shanghai branch that later opened a unit here in the United Kingdom. When they closed the British branch 3 years ago, everyone was laid off." Liang Wei, partially understanding the conversation, asked Louisa in Mandarin to explain the situation. When she finished, the Chinese businessman seemed deeply affected. "He wants to know my mother's full name," Louisa translated. "Constance de Silva," she replied, and then added some additional information in Mandarin. Liang Wei's face lit up with recognition. Kong de Silva?" Louisa nodded, smiling. That's what they called her in China. Nobody could pronounce Constance. The Chinese investor began to speak rapidly in Mandarin, his gestures indicating growing excitement. Louisa translated for Roderick, who listened open-mouthed. "He says my mother was one of the best employees he ever had. That she learned Mandarin in record time and became essential for communication between the Chinese and British branches. He says he was very disappointed when he learned about the closure of the UK unit, but that he was not directly involved in the decision, as he had temporarily stepped away from business due to health issues." Liang Wei continued speaking, now in a more serious and questioning tone. Louisa blushed slightly as she translated. "He asks how we are living now. He wants to know why I am selling candies instead of being at school." Roderick felt his stomach sink, remembering again how he had treated the girl. He watched as Louisa responded in Mandarin, her small face assuming a dignified expression that seemed to age her 10 years. "What did you tell him?" Roderick asked when she finished. "The truth," Louisa replied simply, "that my mother couldn't find another job as a bilingual secretary because companies considered her overqualified for common positions and outdated for executive roles. That she now works as a cleaner in family homes. That I'm selling candies after school to help buy her medicine, which costs almost a third of the salary we receive." Roderick felt a lump in his throat. For a few seconds, the business meeting, the multi-million-pound investment, everything seemed insignificant in the face of that raw reality presented in the figure of that 11-year-old girl. Liang Wei, visibly moved, said something more. Louisa listened attentively and then turned to Roderick. "Mr. Liang says we need to resume the meeting, but that he would like to talk more about my mother later. He asks if we can continue discussing the software." Roderick nodded, trying to recompose his professional demeanor. He resumed the project presentation, now with renewed enthusiasm. As he explained the system's functionalities and advantages, he noticed that Liang Wei's interest had significantly increased. The investor's questions became more specific, more technical, as if he were truly considering the investment seriously. Louisa continued to translate impeccably, her knowledge of technical terms repeatedly surprising both businessmen. 2 hours passed like minutes. When they reached the discussion of values and percentages, Roderick felt that his chance to save the company was closer than ever. Liang Wei seemed genuinely interested, taking notes and occasionally nodding in approval. "He says the numbers seem solid, but he would like to better understand the operational cost structure," Louisa translated, now taking small sips from the second glass of juice Roderick had ordered for her. As the British businessman explained the cost spreadsheet in detail, Liang Wei cast occasional glances at Louisa, his expression alternating between admiration and what seemed to be a feeling of guilt. When the meeting finally reached the coffee break, Roderick couldn't hide his optimism. Liang Wei seemed much more receptive than in any previous email communication. As the investor stepped away to make a call, Roderick turned to Louisa. "You are..." Impressive, he said sincerely. I've never seen anyone so young with such ability. I'm very sorry for the way I treated you earlier. Louisa looked at him with eyes too wise for her age. You only saw me as a poor girl selling candies, not as a person. The simple words hit Roderick like a punch to the stomach. He opened his mouth to reply, but no justification seemed adequate. You're right, he finally admitted. I was arrogant and cruel. I judged you by your appearance, not by what you're capable of doing. And I am deeply ashamed of it. A small smile appeared on Louisa's lips, the first genuine one she directed at Roderick. My mother always says that recognizing a mistake is already halfway to fixing it. Liang Wei returned to the table, his face now displaying a determined expression. He addressed Louisa in Mandarin, speaking quickly. The girl listened attentively, her eyes widening progressively. When the investor finished, she seemed speechless. What was it? What did he say? Roderick asked, anxious. Louisa took a deep breath before responding, her voice slightly trembling. He said he has made a decision about the investment, but before announcing it, he wants to make me a proposal. A proposal that could change my mother's life. And mine. A silence heavy with expectation hung over the table. Roderick felt his heart quicken. That moment could determine the future of his company and dozens of employees who depended on it. Liang Wei remained serene, but his eyes revealed an intensity that was not present at the beginning of the meeting. What kind of proposal? Roderick finally asked, looking from Louisa to the Chinese investor. Louisa took a deep breath and began to translate. Mr. Liang says he is impressed with two things today. First, with the software your company developed, which he believes has great potential in the Asian market. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. Second, with my translation skills and my technical knowledge, despite my age. Roderick nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and curiosity. The first part of the message was extremely positive for his business, but he couldn't imagine what would come next. Liang Wei continued speaking in Mandarin, gesturing occasionally as he explained his idea. Louisa listened attentively, her eyes widening more and more. He says he made a mistake 3 years ago, she translated, when the Chinese businessman paused. He says that during his absence due to health issues, the board made misguided decisions, including the closure of the British branch where my mother worked. When he returned, the cuts had already been made, and many valuable employees were lost. Liang Wei continued speaking, now in a more emphatic tone. He believes this meeting is not a coincidence, but an opportunity to correct a past mistake. He says that people with my mother's talent and mine, Louisa blushed slightly, should not be wasted. Roderick noticed that the girl hesitated to translate the next part. What else did he say, Louisa? He proposes 3 things, she replied, her voice small but firm. First, to invest the £80 million in your company, Mr. Roderick, on the condition that 5% of the shares be allocated to an employee appreciation program. Roderick almost choked on his own saliva. The investment would be secured. That condition was a small price to pay for the salvation of his company. He nodded enthusiastically, indicating for Louisa to continue. Second, she continued, he wants to rehire my mother as international relations coordinator for the new partnership between his company and yours, with a salary commensurate with her qualifications and experience. Tears began to form in the girl's eyes, but she held them back, taking a deep breath to continue. And third, he wants to offer me a full scholarship to a high-level bilingual school, as well as a mentorship program in translation and international business. When I turn 14, I will be able to work as a junior intern at the company, with hours adapted to my studies. Roderick watched, dumbfounded. The girl's face as she processed that proposal that would completely transform her life. For a moment, he thought about how he had wrongly judged that child, considering her just a small, unimportant candy seller. Liang Wei added something more in Mandarin, his tone now softer. Louisa sniffled as she translated. He says this is just the beginning. That talents like mine need to be nurtured and developed. That if I wish, when I am older, I can study abroad with all expenses paid by his educational foundation. The Chinese investor smiled gently at the girl before turning to Roderick with an expression that had now become serious and professional. He asks if you accept the investment conditions, Louisa translated, her voice regaining composure. Roderick didn't even need to think. Yes, absolutely. I accept all conditions. Turning to Louisa, he added, tell him I am impressed not only with his business acumen, but also with his sense of justice and social responsibility. When Louisa translated these words, Liang Wei smiled and extended his hand to Roderick. The two men sealed the agreement with a firm handshake. He says the lawyers will finalize the details in the coming days, but the deal is closed, Louisa translated, a smile lighting up her face. Roderick felt an enormous weight lifted from his shoulders. His company was saved. More than that, he now had a powerful partner for international expansion. Louisa, he said, turning to the girl, I have no words to thank you for what you did today. Without you, this agreement would have been impossible. She smiled shyly. I just did what I know how to do, sir. No, you did much more, Roderick insisted. You not only saved my company, but you taught me a lesson I will never forget, about not judging people by appearance, about seeing potential where others only see limitations. Liang Wei, sensing the emotional moment, intervened in Mandarin. Louisa translated, now with a more confident smile. Mr. Liang says this is just the beginning of a long and prosperous partnership, and that he would like to meet my mother as soon as possible. The Chinese businessman looked at his watch and said something more. He asks if we can go to my house now, Louisa translated, anxiety showing in her voice. He wants to speak personally with my mother about the proposal. Roderick nodded immediately. Of course, I can call my driver and we'll all go together, but he hesitated for a moment. Won't your mother be too surprised by our visit? Louisa bit her lip, thoughtful. She's sick, but it's nothing contagious. It's chronic bronchitis that got worse because we couldn't afford the new medicine the doctor prescribed. She hesitated. Our house is very simple, very different from this restaurant. That does not matter, Liang Wei interrupted in basic English, surprising both of them. He completed the sentence in Mandarin, which Louisa translated. He says that people's worth is not in where they live, but in who they are and what they are capable of doing. Roderick felt a wave of shame remembering how he had treated Louisa hours earlier, judging her precisely by her simple appearance. He nodded emphatically, trying to mask his discomfort. He's absolutely right. Let's call my driver right now. While Roderick made the call, Louisa allowed herself for the first time in that turbulent day to truly absorb what was happening. In a matter of hours, her life had been completely transformed. From a humiliated candy seller to a key player in a multi-million-pound negotiation, from a girl worried about her mother's medicine to a future scholarship student with international prospects. The tears she had held back finally began to fall, silent but abundant. They were not tears of sadness but of an emotion so profound that her small body could barely contain it. Liang Wei noticed her emotional state and, with surprising gentleness, for a businessman of his stature, offered her a silk handkerchief that he took from the inner pocket of his impeccable jacket. Thank you, Louisa murmured in Mandarin, wiping her eyes. The Chinese businessman replied with something that made her smile amidst her tears. When Roderick hung up the phone and asked what had been said, Louisa translated. He said that tears of joy are like rain after a long drought. They bring new life to lands that seemed hopeless. While they waited for the driver, Louisa remembered her box of candies still half full. She looked at it with a new understanding. Those simple homemade candies had been the beginning of everything, the small detail that had brought her to that restaurant on that specific afternoon. Would you like to try some? She offered, extending the box first to Liang Wei, then to Roderick. My mother makes the best homemade candies in London. The two men accepted, each choosing a colourful candy from the worn wooden box. As they tasted them, their expressions transformed into genuine surprise. This is delicious, Roderick commented, truly impressed. Liang Wei agreed in Mandarin, adding something that made Louisa laugh. What did he say? Roderick asked, curious. He said that besides everything else, my mother should also open a confectionery, because these candies are better than many he tasted in Paris and New York. The three laughed together, a moment of lightness that sealed an improbable connection between people from such different worlds. Roderick's phone rang. It was his driver, informing him that he was at the restaurant's door. "Shall we go?" he asked, standing up and offering his hand to help Louisa with her box of candies. The girl nodded, picking up her small school backpack. Before they left, Mr. James, the maitre d', discreetly approached, handing her the card Camilla had left. "The lady who bought your candies asked me to give you this," he explained with a gentle smile. Louisa looked at the card. Dr. Camilla Rivers, specialist lawyer in labor and immigration law. On the back, a handwritten message. "If you need help with documents or legal matters for your mother, call me. The first consultation is free." Carefully putting the card in her pocket, Louisa felt that the universe was conspiring in her favor. In less than a day, people she hadn't even imagined existed were entering her life, opening doors that seemed locked forever. The three left, the restaurant under the curious gaze of the other customers, forming an unusual image. The tall and tense British businessman, the elegant and serene Chinese investor, and the small girl in a worn school uniform who, in some way, seemed to be the central figure of that strange alliance. Roderick's executive car wound through the streets of London, leaving behind the imposing skyscrapers of the financial centre and entering progressively simpler areas of the city. Louisa, seated between Roderick and Liang Wei in the back seat, indicated the way with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "It's at the end of that street past the bakery," she instructed the driver, pointing to a narrow alley that opened between small shops. When the luxury vehicle entered the modest street, the residents' gazes immediately turned to it. It was not common to see cars of that caliber in that peripheral area of London's East End. Children stopped their games to observe, while adults cast curious glances from windows and gates. "It's here," Louisa finally said, pointing to a small, faded green townhouse. "We live on the second floor." The driver parked, and the three exited the vehicle. Roderick felt out of place in that environment, so distant from his daily reality. The simple houses, squeezed against each other, the improvised electrical wiring, the uneven asphalt, everything contrasted with his world of gated communities and luxurious offices. Liang Wei, on the other hand, observed everything with genuine interest without any sign of discomfort or judgment. His eyes caught details, the plants carefully maintained in reused paint cans, the colorful clothes hung on clotheslines, the smell of homemade food coming from various directions. Life was pulsating there, in a way often lacking in the sterile environments of affluent areas. Louisa guided them up a narrow side staircase that led to the second floor. Before reaching the door, she turned to the two men. "My mother doesn't know I'm bringing you. She might be scared at first," she explained seriously. "And she's not feeling very well this morning. That's why she didn't go to work." Roderick nodded, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He was about to enter the home of a sick woman, without prior notice, to offer her a job after his company had contributed to her unemployment years ago. The situation was, at the very least, awkward. Louisa unlocked the door and entered, calling, "Mum, I'm home and I brought some people with me." The small apartment was extremely organized and clean, despite its simplicity. Old but well-maintained furniture functionally occupied the space. Plants in colorful pots made from recycled bottles gave life to the environment. On the walls, besides some art reproductions, there were framed diplomas and photographs of Constance and Louisa at various moments, including some clearly taken in China. A woman approximately 40 years old emerged from what seemed to be the bedroom, wrapped in a worn but impeccably clean bathrobe. Despite evident signs of tiredness and illness, deep dark circles, accentuated thinness and dry lips, she maintained a dignified posture. Her curly hair, identical to Louisa's, was pulled back in an improvised bun. "Louisa, who are?" Constance stopped abruptly upon recognizing the Asian man accompanying her daughter. Her eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Liang?" The Chinese businessman smiled gently and greeted her in Mandarin. Constance, still stunned, automatically replied in the same language, her fluency evident even in those few words. Louisa quickly intervened, explaining in Portuguese, "Mum, this is Mr. Liang Wei. Do you remember him from Lee Group Enterprises? And this is Mr. Roderick Alistair, owner of Alistair Tech." Constance cast a confused glance at her daughter, then at the two men. Instinctively, she adjusted her bathrobe and ran a hand through her hair, embarrassed to be seen in those conditions. "Please, forgive my appearance. I wasn't expecting visitors and—" "You don't need to apologize for anything," Roderick interrupted, genuinely embarrassed. "We are the ones who should apologize for showing up unannounced." Liang Wei said something in Mandarin, and Constance replied, still visibly confused. Louisa translated for Roderick. "Mr. Liang said he is very happy to see you again after so many years, and that he deeply regrets the circumstances of your professional separation. Mum thanked him but asked what was happening. Perhaps we should sit down and explain everything," Roderick suggested, realizing how disconcerting the situation must be for Constance. Louisa nodded and led everyone to the small living room. Constance, still stunned, excused herself for a moment to change clothes. When she returned, she was wearing simple trousers and a white blouse, her hair now loose framing her face. Even in such modest attire, she exuded an innate dignity that Roderick couldn't help but notice. "Now, can someone explain what's happening?" she asked, sitting down and looking alternately at the visitors and her daughter. "Louisa, you should be selling the candies. What happened? How did you meet these gentlemen?" The girl took a deep breath and began to recount the events of that extraordinary afternoon, the humiliation at the restaurant. At this point, Roderick visibly winced, the translator who didn't show up, her intervention as interpreter, and finally, the recognition of the locket by Liang Wei. As Louisa narrated, Constance's face transformed, from initial confusion to astonishment, then to understanding, and finally, to a contained emotion that made her eyes shine with unshed tears. When her daughter finished, Constance remained silent for a few moments, processing everything. Finally, she turned to Liang Wei and said something in Mandarin. The Chinese businessman responded, and a brief conversation followed between the two. Louisa translated for Roderick. "My mother asked if the proposal is real or some kind of charity. Mr. Liang replied that he doesn't do charity in business. He only recognizes and values talent. He said he made a mistake by allowing employees like her to be dismissed, and that in the business world, being able to recognize and correct mistakes is as important as not making them." Roderick nodded, deeply identifying with that sentiment. He himself was there, in part, to correct the error of having judged and humiliated Louisa. Liang Wei then turned to Roderick, speaking in simple English. "Explain to Mrs. Constance your part in new agreement." Roderick cleared his throat, nervous. "Mrs. Constance, as Louisa must have explained, my company has developed artificial intelligence software for industrial optimization. Mr. Liang has just agreed to invest £80 million in the project, on the condition that 5% of the shares be allocated to an employee appreciation program." He paused before continuing. "Part of this agreement includes hiring you as our international relations coordinator, especially for interfacing with the Asian market. Your salary would be commensurate with your qualifications and experience, including full health insurance for you and Louisa." Constance blinked several times, as if trying to assimilate the information. "But my resume is outdated. I've been out of the corporate market for 3 years. "That's not a problem," Roderick assured. "We will provide an update program, courses, everything necessary for you to feel comfortable taking on the position." Liang Wei added something in Mandarin, which Louisa translated. "Mr. Liang says that skills like yours don't disappear in 3 years. He says that your cultural and linguistic knowledge is a rare and valuable asset that cannot be easily acquired in courses." Constance took a deep breath, visibly emotional. Then she turned to her daughter. "And you, Louisa? Did they mention anything about a scholarship?" Louisa smiled, her eyes shining with excitement. "Mr. Liang is offering a full scholarship to St. Paul's International School, Mum. It's that amazing bilingual school we always see in commercials. And when I'm 14, I'll be able to intern at the company, learning about translation and international business." Constance covered her mouth with her hand, unable to contain her tears now. "But this is less than your daughter deserves," Roderick completed sincerely. "Without Louisa, this agreement wouldn't exist. She not only translated our meeting, but demonstrated knowledge and maturity that impressed all of us." Liang Wei smiled and added in his limited English, "Your daughter, much talent, bright future." Constance looked at the two men, then at Louisa. with an expression that mixed pride, gratitude, and a touch of natural distrust from someone who had faced many disappointments in life. "This seems unbelievable," she finally said. "Like a dream I'm afraid to wake from." "It's not a dream, Mum," Louisa assured, holding her hands. "It's real. All of this is real." Constance took a deep breath, trying to control her emotion. Then, with renewed determination in her gaze, she straightened in her chair and addressed Roderick in a professional tone. "When can I start? And what exactly would my responsibilities be?" Roderick smiled, recognizing the competent professional emerging beneath the layer of momentary fragility. "Ideally, as soon as your health permits. As for responsibilities, we would primarily need your expertise to establish communication with potential clients in the Asian market, translate technical documentation, and help adapt our marketing strategy to that cultural context." Constance nodded, already mentally processing this information. "And what about the contract? Terms, benefits, working hours? We can discuss all these details in the coming days," Roderick replied. "My lawyers will prepare a formal proposal, which you can calmly review and suggest adjustments if necessary." Liang Wei intervened in Mandarin, which Louisa translated. "Mr. Liang suggests that you consult an independent lawyer to review the contracts. He even mentioned that he can recommend one, if necessary." "Actually," Louisa interrupted, taking a card from her pocket, "Dr. Camilla Rivers, whom we met today at the restaurant, left her contact information. She is a specialist in labor and immigration law." Constance took the card, examining it carefully. Then, in a gesture that surprised even herself, she extended her hand first to Liang Wei, then to Roderick. "It seems we have an agreement. Gentlemen," she declared firmly, despite her voice being slightly choked. "But before anything else, I need to address my health situation." "The new treatment? That will be arranged immediately," Roderick assured. "The company's health insurance plan can be activated on an emergency basis today. I can make a call right now and—" He was interrupted by a coughing fit from Constance, dry, deep, clearly painful. Louisa rushed to get water, while the two men exchanged worried glances. When the fit passed, Constance smiled weakly. "I think I'll accept that emergency health insurance offer." While Roderick made the call, Liang Wei approached Constance and said something in Mandarin that made her genuinely smile for the first time since they arrived. When Louisa translated for Roderick, he couldn't help but smile too. Mr. Liang said the ancient Chinese proverb was right. Life is like embroidery. Up close, it just looks like tangled threads, but when you step back, you see the complete pattern in all its beauty. Looking at mother and daughter, side by side on the small worn sofa of that modest apartment, Roderick had the distinct feeling of witnessing not just a successful business deal, but the beginning of a transformation that would go far beyond the financial aspect. It was a change of perspective, for Constance, for Louisa, for Liang Wei, and perhaps most profoundly, for himself. 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon at the Regent Star restaurant. Louisa's and Constance's lives had transformed in ways they couldn't have imagined, even in their most optimistic dreams. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the executive car parked in front of their new address, a comfortable apartment in Kensington, an affluent London borough, close to Alistair Tech's office and St. Paul's International School, where Louisa now studied. It wasn't a luxurious or ostentatious place, but safe, spacious, and perfectly suited for Constance's new professional reality. Louisa got out of the car, now wearing the impeccable uniform of her new school. At 11 years old, she was still the same sweet and determined girl, but something in her gaze had changed. It was no longer the look of someone carrying worries beyond their age, but that of someone beginning to glimpse infinite possibilities. "Thank you for the ride. Mr. Roderick," she thanked, adjusting her backpack on her shoulders. "The project presentation was incredible." Roderick smiled, also exiting the vehicle. In recent months, it had become a habit for him to pick Louisa up from school on Fridays and take her to visit the company, where she would spend a few hours learning about the business. What had started as a gesture of gratitude had transformed into a genuine mentorship from which both benefited. "You were incredible," he replied, helping her carry the model to the elevator. That suggestion about adapting the software interface for mobile devices was truly inspired. "Our engineers are already working on it." Louisa blushed slightly at the compliment. She was still learning to receive recognition for her ideas. When they entered the apartment, they found Constance in the living room, surrounded by documents and with her laptop open on the dining table. 6 months of proper treatment had brought about a visible transformation. Color had returned to her face, her body had regained a healthy weight, and her eyes, once constantly tired, now reflected vitality and purpose. "How was the company visit?" she asked, getting up to embrace her daughter. "It was amazing, Mum. I presented my science project to the development department and they loved it." Louisa practically bounced with enthusiasm. Mr. Roderick said, "We can implement some of the ideas in the next release." Constance smiled, proud, and exchanged a grateful look with Roderick. "How wonderful, darling. Why don't you go put your things away while I finish reviewing these documents with Mr. Roderick? Then we'll celebrate your success with that special lunch I promised." As Louisa ran to her room, Roderick observed the documents scattered across the table: reports, charts, presentations, all related to Alistair Tech's expansion into the Asian market. "How are the travel preparations going?" he asked, sitting down. "Everything is on track," Constance replied, "professional as ever. The meetings in Shanghai and Beijing are confirmed. All promotional materials have been culturally adapted and are already in production. Mr. Liang personally reviewed the presentations and approved them." Roderick nodded, impressed as always with her efficiency. In just 6 months as International Relations Coordinator, Constance had not only met all expectations, but had significantly exceeded them. Her ability to navigate between cultures, her rapidly updated technical knowledge, and her impeccable work ethic had become indispensable to the company. "And what about you and Louisa? Are you ready to return to China after so long?" A nostalgic smile lit up Constance's face. "It's strange, you know, to leave as a bilingual secretary and return as an executive, leading negotiations." She paused reflectively. As for Louisa, she's beyond excited. She can't wait to show Professor Chen, her old mentor, how she maintained her fluent Mandarin. The mention of the old teacher made Roderick remember something. "Speaking of which, this arrived for you today." He took an elegant envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Constance. "It's from Mr. Liang." She opened the envelope, revealing a formal invitation on high-quality paper, with text in Mandarin and Portuguese side by side. Her eyes widened as she read the content. This is an invitation to the inauguration ceremony of the new Liang Educational Foundation," she asked incredulously. "In Shanghai?" "Not just an invitation," Roderick explained. "Mr. Liang is announcing Louisa as the first official beneficiary of the Foundation's cultural exchange program. She will spend 1 month each year studying there, starting from the next school holidays." At that moment, Louisa returned to the living room, now dressed in casual clothes. Noticing her mother's emotional expression, she approached curiously. "What happened?" Constance extended the invitation to her with slightly trembling hands. As Louisa read, her eyes widened progressively. This means I'm going to study in China. Every year?" The disbelief in her voice was palpable. 1 month a year," Roderick confirmed, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "Mr. Liang believes that talents like yours should be continuously nurtured. The Foundation will offer intensive programs in languages, international business, and technology for promising young people from various countries. And you are the first on the list." Louisa was momentarily speechless, something rare for someone usually so articulate. When she finally managed to speak, her voice came out choked with emotion. All this because of some homemade candies and a meeting." Constance approached her daughter, embracing her by the shoulders. "No, dear. It wasn't because of the candies or the meeting. It was because of your courage, your intelligence, and most importantly, your kindness. You could have turned your back when that man needed help, after the way he treated you. But you chose to be better than that." Roderick lowered his eyes, still uncomfortable when he remembered that moment. "Your mother is right, Louisa. You taught me a lesson that no MBA course could teach." A significant silence hung in the room, each absorbed in their own reflections on the extraordinary path they had traveled in recent months. It was Louisa who finally broke the silence. "Remember the candy box, Mum? The one we used to sell in the restaurant?" Constance nodded, a little confused by the change of subject. "I kept it," the girl continued. It's in my room. Sometimes, when all this seems too good to be true, I hold it to remind myself where we came from and how we got here. Constance's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Louisa. The doorbell rang, interrupting the emotional moment. Roderick checked his watch. It must be Mr. Liang, he commented. He mentioned he would stop by to discuss some travel details. Constance discreetly wiped her eyes and went to answer the door. As expected, Liang Wei entered elegant as ever in his perfectly tailored suit. He greeted everyone warmly, first in Portuguese, a language he had been diligently studying in recent months, and then exchanged a few words in Mandarin with Louisa. We received the invitation, Mr. Liang, Constance said, regaining her professional composure. It's an incredible honor for Louisa. The Chinese businessman smiled, his eyes fixed on the girl. The honor is mine. Talents like Louisa's are rare. They need to be cultivated with care, like precious jade. Turning to Roderick, he added, By the way, excellent news from China. 3 major industries have already signed contracts to implement Alistair Tech's system. Impressed by the online demonstration Constance conducted last week, Roderick couldn't contain a smile of satisfaction. In just 6 months, his company had gone from the brink of bankruptcy to becoming a promising international player, with positive cash flow and encouraging growth prospects. All thanks to an exceptional team, he replied with genuine gratitude. I'm learning that the greatest asset of any company is not its products or technologies, but the people who make it all possible. Liang Wei nodded in approval. Important lesson. Many businessmen never learn. The Chinese investor's gaze swept across the apartment, pausing on a small shelf where Constance kept photographs of her daughter, at various moments, from babyhood to the present. He approached for a closer look, stopping before a specific photo. Louisa, at 7 years old, smiling beside her mother, both in front of a traditional Chinese temple. Jade Buddha Temple, he identified. Shanghai, Constance smiled, joining him. Yes, our first month in China. Louisa was fascinated by everything. The food, the ideograms, the people. She learned the language with a speed that surprised everyone. Not surprising, Liang Wei commented. Some are born with a gift for connecting different worlds. Turning to Roderick, he added, Like in business, sometimes we need to cross oceans to find ideal partners. Louisa, who was observing the interaction with interest, commented in Mandarin something that made Liang Wei laugh openly, a rare sound coming from the always restrained businessman. What did she say? Roderick asked, curious. Constance translated, also laughing. She said we're like that Chinese dish that mixes Western and Eastern ingredients. Strange at first glance, but surprisingly delicious when you try it. Everyone laughed at the apt analogy. Indeed, that improbable alliance between a former cleaner, now an international relations expert, a British businessman on the verge of bankruptcy, a powerful Chinese investor, and an extraordinary 11-year-old girl had proven to be a surprisingly harmonious and productive combination. Speaking of food, Constance intervened, checking her watch. Our celebratory lunch is scheduled for half an hour from now at the Regent Star. I believe we have a reservation for 4 people, Roderick confirmed with a nod. Special table at Mr. James's request. He has been following Louisa's journey with particular interest. The mention of the maitre d', who had always treated her with kindness, brought a smile to Louisa's face. Does he still let children sell candies there? Better than that, Roderick replied. Inspired by your story, we created a joint program with the restaurant. Once a week, young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged communities have space to present their small businesses to customers. We've had everything from homemade candies to apps developed by self-taught teenagers. Louisa's eyes lit up. That's amazing. Can we participate in the next selection? Of course, Roderick confirmed. In fact, Mr. James asked if you wouldn't like to help choose the next participants. As they prepared to leave, Liang Wei approached Louisa and handed her a small package wrapped in red tissue paper, a lucky color in Chinese culture. A gift to celebrate your bright future. Intrigued, the girl carefully opened the package, revealing a beautiful jade locket, similar to the one her mother owned, but with a different design carved into the stone. It's beautiful, she murmured, admiring the craftsmanship. Special symbol, Liang Wei explained. Represents bridge between worlds. Like you. Emotional, Louisa impulsively hugged the Chinese businessman, a gesture that months earlier would have been unthinkable given the formality he normally maintained. To everyone's surprise, Liang Wei returned the hug with genuine affection. Observing the scene, Constance couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary turns life could provide. Just 6 months ago, they were struggling to buy medicine. Now they were preparing for an international business trip, with Louisa destined for a future that once seemed unattainable. When they finally left the apartment, the four together, there was an almost palpable atmosphere of possibilities and hope. In the elevator, Louisa discreetly held her mother's hand, squeezing it softly, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could express. Upon arriving at the Regent Star restaurant, Mr. James personally greeted them with a warm smile that widened upon seeing Louisa. The same environment that had witnessed her humiliation now welcomed her as a guest of honor. "Welcome," the maître d' greeted, leading them to a table specially prepared by the window with a view of Regent Street. "We've prepared something special to celebrate the success of our little big translator." As they walked between the tables, Louisa noticed a girl approximately her age, wearing a worn school uniform similar to her old one, timidly offering crafts to customers. Their gazes met for an instant, a moment of silent recognition between someone who had been there and someone who is just beginning their journey. As they sat at the table, Roderick raised his glass of water in an improvised toast. To Louisa, he proposed, who taught us that talent can come from the most unexpected places, and that small acts of kindness can transform entire lives. As everyone joined the toast, Louisa looked around at her mother, whose dignity and knowledge finally received deserved recognition. At Roderick, transformed from an arrogant businessman into an attentive mentor. At Liang Wei, who used his power and influence to correct injustices and create opportunities. At the restaurant that had been the scene of her humiliation and now witnessed her triumph. At that moment, she understood with surprising clarity for someone so young. The true value of people is not in the titles they hold, the clothes they wear, or the places they frequent. It lies in the ability to see others beyond appearances, to extend a hand even when it would be easier to turn your back, to transform challenges into opportunities, and, most importantly, to use any success achieved to open doors for those still fighting for a chance. Touching the new jade locket around her neck, Louisa smiled. Her journey was just beginning.